All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome to this webinar on From Feedback to Lesson Planning. And in this webinar, we're going to be talking about how Microsoft Copilot shows up in the classroom. So we'll introduce ourselves in a moment, but let us know where you're coming in from in the chat. So let us know. We had loads of people on the previous call earlier on today, all the way from everywhere from Malaysia to the States to the UK. So please let us know where you are joining us from. That'd be really great. Okay, so without further ado, let us introduce ourselves. So my name is Phil Badham, and I am Director of Learning Designer Pro. We're an educational technology training company and a Microsoft Global Training Partner. I've been an educational technologist for a couple of decades and a former high school English teacher as well. And also have done lots of things, interventions and visible learning consultancy for schools all across the world. And really proud to be bringing you this webinar today with my colleague and friend, Dave Ollinger. So Dave, can you just introduce yourself and tell us about what you do?
Hi, I'm Dave Ollinger. I'm a Director of Digital Strategy at O'Day High School. I've been in the classroom and working in schools for over 25 years. And I'm currently, leading the technology initiatives at O'Day. I'm a Microsoft Innovative Educator Fellow, a Microsoft Showcase School Leader, and an MIE expert, and have I get a lot of pleasure out of helping teachers get the best out of the technology in the classroom. And we're really excited about what AI can bring to the table here, especially using Copilot and the tools that Microsoft's developing specifically for teachers.
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, and Dave's Microsoft credentials are second to none. Absolutely seeped in it throughout his school career, and there's not a lot that Dave doesn't know about Microsoft, as we're about to find out in the webinar today.
And I'm
Um,
excited because on the call today, there's a teacher that taught me well, actually, she took me to Peru and really transformed my life. I'm really glad to see her on the call.
That's awesome. And that's really great, Dave. And actually, really relevant there because one thing that we love about being Learning Designer Pro and doing a lot of these webinars is that we have over the years built up a real community of educators, and we love working with educators. We love seeing you guys at our webinars. We love telling you about all the exciting things that are coming to you down the line. So if you want to join the community and subscribe to our webinars, we'd love to see you back in the future. And we are on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook, and we're also available by email on info@learningdesignerpro.com. So we'd love you to join and follow us and become part of this community. So, because it's those sort of experiences that Dave mentioned, which communities are for, and support each other and help each other in our work. So before we get started with having a look at how feedback is served by Copilot and how that turns up in the classroom, we're just going to do a very quick overview about the ecosystem in which 365 Copilot sits. So we're going to tell you a little bit about what Copilot is and where it fits into your Microsoft system. So Dave, tell us a little bit about Copilot and all of its different forms.
Right. So, Copilot is the AI, layer that you'll find in the entire Microsoft ecosystem. And some of the elements that have been designed, especially for teachers, is going to be Microsoft Teach, which is a Copilot application that helps you generate content and develop learning experiences for teachers. There is the Copilot Notebook, which can be a collection of different pages that have been generated with content that you've developed with AI, with Copilot, that you can turn into podcasts and that you can organize, and then you can ask, you kind of have a dialogue with Copilot with. There is, Researcher, which is the deep researching Copilot agent that is created inside of the Teams interface and then the Office interface. And then we have Copilot Studio, which we'll go through today, where you can create your own AI agents to do specific work. Today we're going to show you how you can develop one for for engaging with a lesson with student data and giving you very specific ways to improve your teaching and practice. And then there's Microsoft Create, which helps you use AI to create images and to create, designed based documents like in Word or even in Excel.
Thanks, Dave. Yes, there's an awful lot of functionality that belongs within that family. There are lots of other tools as well, some of which are not Copilot specifically, but we know that there are huge amounts of tools provided within Microsoft, which appeals both the educator and the learner. And we've sort of just put together this little diagram here to show you how some of them are separated out, some which are specifically for the educator, such as the Teach module, which we'll have a look at later on in the session, and also Copilot Studio, which Dave mentioned, but also other more learner-specific or learner-centric apps and modules which are particularly helpful for students, such as the learning accelerators and the immersive reader tools, which are great for assistive and inclusion elements. And obviously in the middle, we've got apps and modules and services which are good for both educator and the learner in terms of organizing knowledge, in terms of processing material and content in different ways, and how that serves the curriculum. We won't touch on all of these, and when we do, we'll also give you just a very brief guide to where this might crop up. If you're not seeing the same as what we're seeing, it may depend on whether you've got an education license or not, but we'll point that out for you as we come along and visit these particular tools. Now, the first thing you'll probably notice is when you first encounter Copilot is when you log into to Microsoft. So Dave, talk us through the landing page now and how Copilot exists within it.
One of the areas that I think a lot of teachers have, come across that's different, and therefore anything in technology changes is different, is kind of a barrier, is the landing page at office.com. Now, Microsoft is now leaning towards the kind of Copilot AI first experience when experiencing with their app. So you'll see right in the front is going to be a Copilot chat. And you'll see at the top is between work and web. So if you have the M365 Copilot license, that chat can actually sift through all of your files, your work, and support you with your work. On the upper left-hand side, you'll see that Phil's highlighting that with the Analyst tool, Classroom Chronicle. Those are the Copilot agents. Some of them are default by Microsoft. Some of them are ones that you can create or that I've created in Copilot Studio. Moving down, you'll see there's something called Conversations in the middle. Those are the conversations you've had with your Copilot, so you can reference historical conversations. The library and notebook is going to highlight some of the historical documents and pages that you've created using Copilot, creating Copilot notebooks. Phil will highlight a little bit of that today. Mm-hmm. And then you can see the create button there. That's the app to help you with designing and making creative tools. And then there's the teach tool, which we'll highlight today. And the bottom, if you want that landing page you're used to with all of the Office apps, you click the apps button at the bottom, and that'll bring you in so you can access your Outlook and Word, etc.
Thanks, Dave. Okay, so having just given you a quick overview of Copilot, we're now going to talk about how the rest of the webinar is going to be structured for you today. So we are going to break this into 3 distinct sections. First of all, we're going to be thinking about how Copilot can support you giving feedback to learners, or how your learners can get feedback specifically to help them improve their work. Not to do their work for them, but to improve their work and give them actionable next steps. So we're going to be seeing how that turns up within Copilot Chat, and how Copilot Chat serves the learner in that respect, and giving them very precise feedback about their work. And we're going to explore a little bit about that before moving on in the second section to getting feedback from learners. We'll be thinking about how do we get feedback from learners about the nature of their understanding, because it is through learning about what learners understand and know that we have their starting points that helps us to plan formatively for the rest of their lessons. And then finally, naturally, following on from that, we're going to be looking at how Copilot AI can support planning, teacher planning, not just to save time, but to actually provide more relevant planning based on the needs of learners, wherever that information is kept or wherever that information is stored. So we'll be looking at teach modules, and then Dave will be looking at how Copilot agents can actually draw different data points down so that you get a much more personalized, customized experience that's relevant to your classroom. So that's the way in which we're going to break down the webinar today into those 3 sections. So the first section, as I said, we're going to be thinking about how we give feedback to learners. And at the end of the day, if you follow educationalists online or you read their books, you'll know that feedback has got a very high effect size in terms of its impact on learning, but it only functions formatively, as Dylan Williams says, if the information fed back to the learner is used by the learner in improving performance. In other words, feedback which is given but is not acted upon does not lead to learning gains. So how can we make sure that feedback which is provided for students isn't just sort of abstract and woolly and just praise, but actually gives them actionable, meaningful feedback that helps them to improve the quality of their work? So what we're going to be doing is thinking about how Copilot specifically can give fast analytical suggestions in the moment, right there, close to proximity to when the learner has completed the work, and how Copilot can actually give feedback, not just off the basis of what it considers to be good practice in and of itself, but actually in relation to specific rubrics that have been provided by the teacher, or even in response to feedback by the teacher. So we can actually use feedback that's been given already, or assessment rubrics that have been given already, to make sure that feedback is targeted particularly well. And then we can also use Copilot to actually mark within the text that the student is working in the actual areas that they could use to improve upon. So Copilot can work in lots of different ways there. So what I'm going to do is just demo what that might look like and how we might explore Copilot chat within Word. So let me just drop into Word now. And what you're looking at here is a very typical piece of writing. This is actually a piece of writing from a grade 5 student in Connecticut. And I've taken their names out of the picture here, but it's actually a very typical piece of analytical writing at this stage of the game, where the student is trying to wrap their heads around textual analysis at this stage of the game. And as a 12, 13-year-old, they're not perhaps using those textual analysis pieces such as quotation, point, evidence, comment, etc., etc. They're just giving quite sort of they're not really giving nuanced answers. They're just describing what's happening within the scene. And the text here is from Arthur Miller's The Crucible, which is a standard text. So how might I begin to bring Copilot to bear upon this piece of writing? Well, if I look up here, you can see that I've got Copilot ready. I'm just going to check I'm in the right tenant there. So I'm just going to click on Copilot, and that's going to open up the Copilot into the window on the right hand side. So we'll just wait for that to pop in, and then it's ready for me to start putting in some a prompt to help me to understand what's in my essay. Now what I'm going to do is do it from the point of view of perhaps a student who might want to get some guidance on this particular essay, but it could equally be a teacher who's asking some questions of this assignment. But let's just take it from the point of view of a student to start with. So first of all, a student might write a prompt that's a little bit vague, something that's a bit generic, just asking it to explain how to make the assignment better. And even just by hitting that button, Copilot's going to have a look at this essay and give some very cogent and focused feedback. Okay, it says that the analysis is clear and well focused, but it says to make it stronger, get straight to the chase. To make it stronger, you can make your thesis more precise and argumentative. It tells you how you might upgrade the idea. It tells you how you might tighten the paragraph structure by invoking a very common way of writing critical analysis using point, evidence, comment, point, evidence analysis. So these are very, very, there's nothing obscure here. There's nothing untoward. It's very, very common, very accurate feedback that any teacher would probably give the student in the moment. But what if the pupil thinks, well, this is all very good feedback and everything, and I can make changes to my essay because of it, but what if it's not what the teacher wants? What if it doesn't fit the rubric that I was given before? Well, what we can actually do is then bring in the rubric which the teacher asked for. So let's just find that rubric. So there's the rubric there. And I'm just going to open that into my prompt box. So there it is, Crucible rubric. And now what I'm going to do is the student is going to say, right, well, how does my writing stack up against this rubric? So he's going to say, how does the stack up against this rubric? Okay, and now the Copilot is going to look at that rubric and give specific feedback based on that rubric. In actual fact, it's going to quote the parts of that rubric that needs to fit. It's currently saying, look, your essay currently sits in number 3 of the first row of that rubric in terms of understanding of subtext. It's currently proficient, but if you want to reach number 4, then you need to make the thesis more insightful and specific by naming the dramatic methods. It's also talking about the use of evidence, analysis of language, tone, and technique. So you can see there it is now providing very specific feedback based on the actual rubric that the student was given in the first place. It's not doing the work for the student, but it is providing that feedback. And what if the student was then to say, okay, so my teacher's already marked this, and the teacher actually said this. The teacher said that it was a good understanding, but I needed perhaps to explain my points in more detail and focus on how language and tone are used. So again, now Copilot's going to look at that and recontextualize that based on the teacher's comment. And it says, here are some targeted ways to improve as it begins to write some more answers for me. So we've got 3 different types of feedback coming in here, all based on different prompts and all based on different inputs. And finally, if I really wanted to, I could say, right, okay, so I think the main thing is that I need to provide some textual analysis and some textual reference points. So can you highlight 5 places in this essay where I should probably put a quote? And what Copilot will then do is to actually put in 5 specific places in your draft where a short quote would strengthen your analysis the most. And if you start working with it, it will actually start to put those into your document. So here's one where it said, I did before, where it said 5 highlighted places to add a quote, and it's actually highlighted the document in yellow where that student then needs to go in and add those quotes in. So you can see how effectively the AI becomes a critical friend to the student rather than actually doing their work for them. And it's not teachers using something like Copilot to analyze a student's work or provide support and feedback like that is essentially just ensuring that the feedback is precise enough, is detailed enough and in-depth enough for that student to make real gains in their learning as a result. So that's one of the ways that we can use Copilot Chat within the actual apps that you're working on in 365. And just to sort of show you how teachers are actually using this as well, this was something that I actually saw today in a school that I was working in Scotland in the UK. And this is Tony Hartley, who's the curriculum leader for art at Craigmount High School. And what he was showing me today was how he's preparing a brand new assessment model for his art students. And he was showing me this particular illustration that he's going to help learners to understand the progress that they're making through art. And basically what he's done, certain elements of this image that you're looking at were made in Copilot, not all of it, but some of it. But what actually Copilot did contribute to here was helping Tony through the thought process of how to make this assessment framework work for his students. So he's basically using AI as a critical friend, as another voice, as another lens to try and refine down exactly what's going to work for him in the classroom. He's not being lazy in any shape or form here. He's using AI to support his thinking, to test his thinking, to challenge his thinking, and to actually make sure that this is testable, that it's that he can sense check what he's doing here, and then also perhaps visualize and articulate what that vision might be in this particular graphic. So he's used Copilot here as a thinking support. As opposed to doing it all for him. And the same thing with one of the teachers that works at Dave's school, so Andrew Cassad, who works in the theology department, doing a project about Edmund Rice, and he used Copilot in order to help him put together a rubric that would assess some of the new outcomes and new activities that he was putting into this scheme of work. So he's revamping, reshaping a scheme of work to be more, to modernize it, to bring more digital outcomes into it. But because he was doing that, he needed to adjust and up-level the rubric to represent that. So he used Copilot to help him look at the content and produce something that would represent the student's work and the quality of students' work in the right way. So this is really helping teachers, not just to save them time, but to actually get to the right outcome for them. So now we're going to sort of move on a little bit from seeing how Copilot can support giving feedback to learners to actually how it can take lots of data points from the work that we're producing in the classroom. So what we're going to have a look at now is thinking about the ways in which teachers can get information from students and how AI might support in that. So getting feedback is probably the most important. In fact, Hattie says that the feedback from the learner to the teacher is the most important feedback of all, because from that feedback, we then understand how to pitch the learning to pitch challenge correctly for those students. And that accurate diagnosis of what students know and don't know is very powerful. Now, lots of teachers that I work with already use Microsoft to gather that sort of information. They often do that by using things like Microsoft Forms, which is fantastic because they get lots of responses. They don't have to hold it all in their heads. They don't have to keep, there's only so much information we can take into our heads in the classroom, day to day, lesson to lesson with all the students that we have. So using technology, using Copilot, using forms means that we can gather that information and we can make sense of it as well. So how can Copilot help? Well, Copilot also exists within forms, okay? And the features that we're going to be focusing on here are how formative assessment can work when we use Copilot with forms, how we might analyze student gaps with how we prompt Copilot in that situation. And I'm going to be looking at a particular example of how we might create hinge questions in this instance. So I'm just going to drop into the chat. So there's the Copilot chat, which Dave mentioned earlier on the slide. And what I'm going to do is go and find my Forms app. So I'm just going to go to my little waffle and go to more apps. And that will load in all of my different apps there. And then I'm just going to find my Forms. There we go. So there's my Forms app. And I'm just going to click on that, and that will start a new form. Now, it's interesting to look at here that when we look at the templates that are served up, we see that feedback is one of the categories. So we've already got a whole set of templates specifically for collecting feedback from not just from our students, but from anyone that we're trying to survey or poll. So we've got a feedback category in its own right. We've even got quiz, registration, research. So these are educationally focused categories with templates in them for forms. So already we've got some things that are ready to use and available. What I'm going to do is choose a new form, and then we'll see how Copilot is now integrated into the forms experience. So as you can see, normally if we're starting a form, we would select our question type and we would start to put that into place. But now we can actually start to draft our form in Copilot. So we can get Copilot to do most of the heavy lifting for us. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create some hinge questions. So hinge questions are questions which are very important in the sense that if our learners haven't got the concept, we can't really move forward until they've actually understood those foundational ideas. So hinge questions are very important. The door swings either way, depending on what sort of input we get back. If everyone knows it, then we can move on. If there's a bit of confusion, then we can close those gaps and close those misconceptions. So what I'm going to do here is ask Copilot to create some hinge questions about quantum theory. So we'll go pretty highbrow here, physics, but we're going to ask some questions about quantum theory. And the first one will be about the classic double slit experiment, the second one about Schrodinger's cat, and the third about wave-particle duality. So all of those represent some quite key aspects and thought experiments within quantum theory. And what I've asked it to do is to provide multiple choice questions, but where all the answers look viable. So there's no obviously silly ones or ones that are completely wrong, but they're all going to seem quite viable. So it's going to make it a little bit tougher. And one of those questions, of course, is going to be correct. But what I've asked it to do is very specific. Hinge questions, these three things, and I want all the answers to be pretty much plausible. So it's going to create that draft, all right? And oops, let's try that again. Okay, so now we have 3 questions and 4 answers in each question. And you can see there that the answers for number 1 about the double slit experiment are all look particularly plausible. None of them look obviously wrong. And what the students can do there is look at those and think, ah, actually, this is quite a tricky one. One of those is right, but I need to also know which ones are wrong and why they're wrong. So there's plenty of discussion, there's plenty of ways in which students can take a position, take an answer, and then that information comes back to me and I can sift through to see where understanding is good or whether understanding is a little bit mixed within the classroom. Because of course, once I've collected those responses, I can then bring them into an Excel spreadsheet and have a look at them then. But notice how Copilot sits within the form there. I can choose to keep these questions or I can fine tune them. Let's say that number 2 was okay, but the first answer I felt wasn't particularly difficult enough or didn't particularly add enough ambiguity into the mix. So I could ask it to replace that particular question with some harder answers. So I can keep refining, I can keep editing, keep adding, but look how much work it's doing for me in the space of time there. Again, it's not about me being lazy, it's about me making the most of my time. Because at the end of the day, me as the teacher will make the decision about whether these outputs are valuable or not. It needs me as the teacher to be the gatekeeper to say, that's what I wanted, and I'll let through and let's have a go at another one, or to say, no, that's not quite right, I need to reprompt. So the teacher's agency, the teacher's skill and knowledge is always there. All I've done as a teacher is delegate the task to my AI buddy or my AI colleague, right? That's essentially how I see it. I've just delegated the work. It's come back to me, it's saved me time, and then it's up to me to refine and tweak and make sure that it fits the purpose that it's designed for. So let's say once I've collected those responses in forms, what then? Well, maybe I'll have exported them into a spreadsheet. Now, what I can then do is, again, bring in my Copilot. And this time I might tell it what the answers to these questions were so that it understands what it's looking at. And then it will probably try and give me some actions that I could take around that particular data. So I've explained to it what the data represents here in my prompt and what those answers were. Copilot's going to think about it. It's probably going to give me some options, such as, do I want to do an analysis of which questions were harder than others? It might ask me if I want to create some visualizations of that data. Okay, there'll be lots and lots of different ways that Copilot will eventually prompt me into doing. So let me just sort of show you if it's going to take its time over it. I can show you some. Here we go. There you go. I've got a quiz analysis dashboard that's come up here. You can see that it's helping me to visualize that data. It's giving me the steps there. But what it also will probably do, and I'll just bring this up on the slide, is it will probably ask me to, if I want to give it a pass or a fail, but it will also tell me the sort of percentage mix of how many questions were right or wrong. And so just a quick look at that will give me some really clear data about which topics I need to go over again. Okay. And which students particularly got the most incorrect or correct. So I can see which students are struggling and I can see which questions cause the most difficulty. So there's lots and lots of really great ways in which we can start to see how Copilot can inform your formative assessment tools. There are some other things as well. I mean, we saw Tony's work earlier where he was working on his assessment framework, but he's also currently working on digitizing self-assessment with his class using forms, and he's using forms with Copilot in order to take that data from the students to show how they feel confidently about the work they're producing. And all of this will replace the traditional handwritten stuff which was done for his students before. And one last thing before I hand over to Dave in a moment is, you might also, if you're doing anything like retrieval practice or you're using short, low stakes quizzing in the classroom to get students to tell you what they already know, asking Copilot Chat to write your retrieval questions. So it could be that you're doing some work on the American Civil War and you're structuring questions in difficulty levels. I could ask it to complete those last 2 questions. It would read the questions, it would see the hierarchy, and it would create those final 2 bottom row questions for my students. Okay, so it's great at providing these sorts of question sets that are going to give me some really, really great stuff. So now Dave's going to talk a little bit about Learning Zone, which is an exciting module within Copilot. Dave, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. That was great. Lots of great examples there. I love seeing what Phil's picking up in the schools because, as I work in a singular school, Phil is out there and with thousands of educators in schools all over the world. And so I'm always excited to see the examples he brings in. So I'm here to share a little bit about Learning Zone. And in regards to feedback, from students, well, Learning Zone is primarily it's an application that's been built by Microsoft that uses artificial intelligence to create learning activities from your own content. Learning Zone can be downloaded from the Microsoft Store. And then you can, if you have a Copilot Plus PC, most of our teachers at O'Day have Copilot Plus PCs. These are relatively new devices that have NPUs on them in addition to the GPUs, which is a neural processing unit, which means the device itself has a small language model upon it, of which this application taps into when generating content from your files. So even if you don't have that type of computer, you can still use Learning Zone. You just have to use the lesson library that's been made. So when you get to the landing page of Learning Zone, it looks a little bit like this. You have the lessons that you've created on the top in this area. You'll have the lesson library you can choose from here. And then you've got the tabs on the left-hand side that let you go through the home page, the lessons you've created, where you can look in more depth, and then the reporting back from the assignments that you've given, the Learning Zone assignments you've distributed to your students. So I've taken some screenshots because I'm not presenting from a Copilot Plus PC, but all of these lessons are ones that I've created. When you assign them, it'll say how many times you've assigned them. If you don't have the Copilot Plus PC, when you go to the Discover tab, you can actually go through it's a huge number of pre-made collections, pre-made assignments that you can navigate through the subject, the grade level, the type. If you have a certain creator who's stuff you like, you can choose that as well. So you can filter it down and you can choose one that fits best for your students and deliver it that way. When you deliver these to students, it's simply a URL address. It'll say, you can have a share button, you send it out to students, and when they take it, you'll get an overview of kind of the average class score on the assignment. You'll also be able to get feedback on each individual student's score on the assignment. And then you'll get feedback on where they landed the first time they did the question. The great thing about this product is students can do it over and over again. In fact, when you go through it the first time, it'll reprompt the ones you did wrong to see if you are able to do a better job. What's great for this is it gives you feedback real time in the classroom about kind of what parts of your lessons are landing. It might even give you feedback on what questions you're creating that might not totally be accurate. But you can see in this assessment, question 14 and 15 had a 39% correct and a 24% correct. That gives that teacher immediate areas that they can focus on in their lesson, right away. When you use this app to create a lesson, you essentially have a create button. You can choose between an interactive lesson, which is the Learning Zone default, or if you use Kahoot, you can also create Kahoots through this. And you just choose which one you want. The dialogue's going to be the same. You give a description of the lesson you'd like to create. You're going to choose your grade level and the number of slides that you would like. There's two types of slides here. There's going to be one that's content that the students read, and there'll be assignments or exercises that students engage with to show their learning. And you can do this slider. You can slide if you want more exercises, choose more exercises. If you want more reading and content, you can choose that as well. If you want the content to be based upon your own documents, you can upload these here, and it'll actually generate questions based upon documents you provide. You can attach that from your computer or even from your OneDrive cloud files. And then there's this button called Vetted Resources. And at the moment, they're mostly OpenStax textbooks, but they're being populated with more and more. But let's say you use OpenStax in your classroom. They have those textbooks there, so you can actually make the assignment based upon chapters from OpenStax. If there's a certain standard set you use, you can put that in here. It'll know the standards. And then given the teaching context, give them maybe the makeup of your class, some of the differentiation you like to have in your class, and it's going to create questions that are tailored for your teaching content. What it looks like after you hit go is this. It's going to give you a lesson outline. Essentially gives you an idea of like, hey, here's what this lesson looks like. You can modify it via chat, or you can manually add different modules to it. When it generates the questions and it generates the content, what it really looks like is in the background here, you'll see these are content slides, generally has an image and some reading. And then these are the activity slides. And, some of them are going to be, true or false. Some will be choose the right answer. Sometimes it's kind of a word drop where you drop the words in the right part of the sentences. And the students will go through that. It gives them some feedback. And then again, they'll get a sense of you get a sense as a teacher what they're doing, and the students get a sense right away of feedback on how they've done on the exam itself or the activities themselves. So essentially, that's Learning Zone. Do we have any questions about that in the chat? No.
Okay. So let's just pop my screen back on here and we'll crack on. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for that. I'm actually going to have a play with Learning Zone as soon as I get my new PC. I look forward to that. But in the last section here, we're going to take on a little bit of what Dave said about planning there. And we're going to look at the Teach module. And we'll duck into a few things. We won't just do planning, but we're going to have a look at some of the other features in that module as well and look at that. So in this section, we're just going to have a think about feedback for planning. So if we've got feedback from our learners, if we've used some of those data collection methods we saw earlier, a lot of the data collection that we have as teachers goes unused. Okay, so a lot of the information we can't carry in our heads, or maybe we collect too much data collection or with too much information, and we don't always use it to the best extent. But as Doug Fisher and Nancy Frey here from Visible Learning said, the value of student data lies in how it guides teacher decisions and students' next learning steps. So the better the data, the better informed the teacher, and the better they can structure and style the lesson to meet the needs of their students. So let's have a little look now at MS Teach, obviously a specific education module for teachers to use. And I'm just going to bring it up on the screen here. And if we look at the left-hand side, top left-hand side of my screen, we've got a few things which include the Teach module. However, I'm not going to immediately duck into that because I want to just show you a few other things in this particular space, one of which is the library. And the library contains lots of things such as what we call pages. So pages are just pieces of information, loose pieces of information that we may have gathered through our research task. There could be some content that we've put together as a learning resource. It could be a worksheet, but they exist as sort of separate bits of information. And those separate bits of information can be bundled together into what we call notebooks. So these are different from your class notebook or your OneNote notebooks. These are Copilot notebooks, and they serve a very specific function, as we'll see in a moment. So if I select the notebooks there, I can see that I've actually got a collection of different notebooks that contain lots of different pages. So these notebooks will contain different bits of information that have been structured together. So if I've been teaching about a particular religion from Roman times, you can see there that I've actually got a collection of different references that I could use, as well as PowerPoints and other documents that form this particular piece of content, this notebook, this collection of content. And what you can also see is that within this Quick Create tab, and also over here in the Quick Create section, the ability for Copilot not just to present you with your structured knowledge, but to actually reprocess it into different forms. So I can, for instance, create an audio overview, e.g., a podcast, for want of better words. So some of you may be thinking, oh, there are other platforms that can create podcasts out of data. Well, so can Microsoft, so can Copilot. Copilot can create an audio podcast of your particular content. But not only can it do that, but it can also put it together into a study guide format, a presentation, a mind map. there's various other ways in which that information can be reprocessed and pointed back at the student. So just be aware that that exists, that these Copilot notebooks have got real power to deliver content to learners, particularly if they have different preferences for receiving that information. But anyway, I digress a little bit. Let's go back to our left-hand side column, and let's go to the Teach module and see what's inside the Teach module. So I've already got some teaching tools as soon as I load it in. I've got 4 different strands here: curriculum planning, modify existing content, homework and assessments, including things like rubrics and quizzes that we saw at the beginning of the webinar. And we've also got some learning activities. And obviously, these are really great methods too of looking for student understanding, and we can create some really lovely interactive activities through this module. So let me just show you one of them. Here's a learning activity. I'm going to select matching, and it's going to ask me for my learning content. So what I'm going to do is paste in some notes here. So here I've got some terms, and I've also got some definitions. This is all to do with architecture. And I'm going to click on generate, and that's going to generate a matching activity for me. So it's going to take 6 randomly selected terms, and then I'm going to preview this to try it out. So let's preview the activity, see what it looks like. Let's start the game. So there we go. I've got my definitions, and they're all mixed up with various terms. So if I click on tracery and it's a match for this particular definition, then they will disappear from the screen. And if I get one wrong, they will flash red and they will stay where they are. So just a really nice way of creating some quick, easy starter activities, retrieval practice activities to test student knowledge and reactivate prior learning. So that's one thing that you can do within the Teach module. But the one thing that I really want to have a look at here is how Teach supports planning. So let's go up to the curriculum planning up here, and we can see there that we've got 3 different things, including a very cool Minecraft education lesson plan. I love Minecraft, so this is news to me and music to my ears. But I'm going to use this for a lesson plan and create a detailed guide for a lesson. And once I'm in this space, I'm offered various tools to help me to get this right. So I'm going to choose a subject of biology and grade 5 level. And it's going to be US, and the description that I'm going to give it is I want a lesson that starts with a new topic with a simple question. So it's going to have an overriding question, which is, if you throw an apple core outside, what happens to it over time? So this is about life processes, basically. So some students may have covered this in a previous class, some may have not. Guide the lesson towards decomposition and reuse of matter, connect it to something familiar like a compost bin, and it also mentions that the teacher has students with a large mix of literacy levels, so that needs to be taken into account during the planning outline. Then I'm going to add my standards. So I'm going to go with a state. So let's choose. There we go. The standards from that state. And I'm going to go grade 5. And the subject is going to be science. And the strand is going to be Earth systems. And then it's basically going to load in all of the individual standards for that state. So I'm going to choose this one here, okay, as my predominant standard. And then I'm going to hit generate. And now it will start to produce an outline that matches my needs with the lesson focus, and also with one eye on the core standards that I've specified. So you can then see that it gives me the standards, gives me the objectives, it gives me materials, okay, that I might need to have, and it then gives me a range, a lesson sequence, an instructional sequence of how I might put this together. Now, all of these individual sections are editable, okay, and I can also move them around. I can shuffle the order around. So if I want a starter in a different position, I can move that around within the lesson plan. So I've got quite a lot of ability to customize that. What I can also do is enhance it using Copilot. So I can give it and say, look, the objectives need to be shorter and need to be more student friendly, and it will make that adjustment for me. It will also suggest some ways in which I can get more interactivity or more collaboration or more group work into the outline. And then, interestingly, I can change the instructional tone. So let's say I'm teaching a brand new topic. I might want the tone to be a little bit more instructional, a bit more didactic. If I want it to be for a different grade level, or I want it to be a little bit further along down the line in terms of the topic, then I could choose it to be more interactive. If I want it to have creative elements, because I want the students to process this in a creative way and show these processes in different forms, then I can add in a creative element to it. Or if I have a very sort of wide level of attainment in my class, I may use the inclusive tone in order to ensure that all learners are represented and all learners receive the instruction at the right level. I can change things like length, default, etc., etc. So you can see there that within the Teach module, I've got some really, really cool tools at my disposal to begin outlining lesson plans and giving me ideas for how lessons might be structured. So that's how the Teach module might support you in your work. But Dave's going to talk a little bit now about agents and talk to us a little bit about how Copilot agents can take this one step further. So I'll stop my share, Dave, and back over to you.
Right on. Well, thank you, Phil. So Copilot agents. So when agents first started to kind of become accessible to everybody, I remember calling up Microsoft and saying, "Can I get a lesson on how to make agents?" And I couldn't find anybody that knew how to do it. So I just said, "Well, I'm going to make some agents." And I found out actually it's pretty simple. The real nice thing about artificial intelligence is that it's language based. You just talk to it and you interact with it and you refine it based upon those interactions. So Copilot Studio is a pretty powerful suite within Microsoft. As we dive into this section, I get really excited about this because I actually think that one of the most important things we can do as educators right now is to protect our students in various ways. We need to protect our students' brains because we know that students need to be challenged and stressed to get that brain activity. And there are ways that students can use AI to circumvent that. We need to teach them the proper way of how to use AI. We also know AI is really powerful and that it's possible that we have data leaks, that people are putting things into models they probably shouldn't. And so we need to educate people on data and privacy. We need to start to change the way we teach about research and academic and media use to refine it so that we can still acknowledge the authors and the areas where we get information from and that we can check for veracity when appropriate. One of the most important things I think happening right now with agents is, of course, the emotional and cognitive relationships. Young people by nature are very vulnerable at a young age. They want to be seen, they want to be heard. They often don't get that. The adult world is a little moving at a faster pace than they want, and so some people are turning to these chatbots for companionship. And as opposed to going to real human relationships. And I do have to say something I appreciate about Microsoft is Copilot's pretty cold and dry. It's not trying to form a relationship with me. It's generally just giving me what I need and moving on. However, that's not true for all the models out there. It's not true for all the AI experiences students are having. In fact, some are designed to develop relationships with them. And so raising their awareness around these things are pretty important. So what is an agent? Just at a high overview here, an agent within the Microsoft ecosystem, Microsoft provides an orchestrator that's orchestrating a bunch of different things at once. It is orchestrating the knowledge base that you're pointing it to. It's orchestrating the prompt from the user experience that you've put into it. They have skills and autonomous things you can embed into it so that it can actually perform tasks for you and even perform tasks without you triggering it to do so. And it's usually built upon foundational models like ChatGPT or even Claude. So there's about 2,800 different models that this can be built on, maybe even more today. So that's that's kind of the foundation of what an agent is. And you can make agents to do all sorts of things. You can do it to just get retrieval from vast amounts of information. You can have it do tasks for you. You can have it, take action when prompted. And then, of course, there are ways to autonomize things to make it so they can do things like respond to emails or even respond to threats if you're a IT manager. I'm just going to get into this thing that we're planning right now. So The agent that I've built for this demo is a co-planner agent. We've been talking a lot about feedback. And so essentially this co-planner agent is meant to give the teacher feedback on how they can do better, how they can serve the students in this specific unit. So this unit is built. It's a writing unit for 8th grade students. Inside of this agent, I have added data around the class profile. I have put unit grades in. Now, these are all fake students because I wouldn't do this with the real students, but this is pretty easy to do. You can put your syllabus in. You can download grades and assignments from your grade book. You can put the graded essays in there. You can put rubrics in there. This one has one-on-one check-in notes from the teacher. It also has student exit tickets that they would have used in like Microsoft Forms. It has their first draft and their second draft in there, and it's analyzing all of this data so that we can engage with it to understand how the class is doing and to quickly extract insights that would have taken teachers ages to do, and they probably wouldn't have even done it, especially in a writing assignment. So I'm actually just going to get into, a Copilot Studio here so you can see what this looks like. So this is the agent. This is the back end of that agent and how it's built. You give it a name, a description. You can choose. Microsoft doesn't make you choose from 2,800 models. You can just choose from a series of different models. I'm choosing Claude Opus 4.6. It had the best responses as I tested it. You just write some instructions for this. You write some instructions, and I have a slide on the best practices for writing instructions. But I'm just going to give it some instructions on what I want it to do, what kind of data it has access to, what kind of voice I want it to use, and what essentially just what I want this thing to do every time I engage with it. And then it's actually trained on data in SharePoint. So if you go into the SharePoint site, you'll see that any data I've put in here, it has access to it. So it's very specific data. When I publish it, it gets published into my Office 365 tenant. Remember that overview that we had at the beginning. So here it's one of my agents. I can pin it to the top if I want to, if I know I'm going to use it frequently. But essentially, I come in here and I give it a prompt. I have a prompt that's already pre-made that I'm going to put in there, and as we do it, we'll just talk through what it does. But I know I did a bunch of exit tickets, and I am curious about what are my students collectively worried about that I haven't addressed in my teaching yet. And it's going to scan through this. It's going to look at the feedback students have given me through my exit tickets, and it's going to give me some real actionable insights on what I can do. Now, just because these agents, they take some time to respond sometimes because it's going through all of this data. And as a good Copilot does, it's going to reference all the data that it's made its assessments from. While this is going, I'm going to put some of the responses that I've made into PDFs of this agent to give you an idea of kind of the detail. If you take the time to build your agent correctly, you can get a lot of detail and a lot of great insights on how to advance your teaching. And so I'm just going to throw a few of these in here to support maybe you taking a look at those as this is lining things up, as it says. It's doing an immense amount of work, even though it might not be acting as quickly as some people would like, but you'll see these outputs are very approachable and they are helpful for educators. As that's going, I'm going to pull one of these up in front of you so we can take a look. But there's I have a series of different feedback that's been given here that I've made in PDFs that I've thrown in here so that you can see. So, for example, this question is kind of where am I giving thin feedback to students? And maybe, sometimes, I don't know if you experience this, I often focus my attention on students who are doing poorly and often avoided students that were doing well. I gave them very quick feedback. Hey, great job, A+, you don't really need it. And so this agent flagged the same thing. And here it's like, 4 students are consistently getting thin feedback from you. And here's the feedback it's giving. It's, just a few words: good claim, solid evidence, on time, complete, good, complete. solid work, nice work, all these affirmatives. Um, but then what it does is it goes in and says, look, these students, what it matters is they're giving feedback to you even in their exit tickets, and it's telling a bigger story about your feedback, which Noah wrote in week 1. I wonder what my best topic is. By week 3, he wrote, I revised my essay. And his wonder was, I wonder what my final grade is going to be. So his questions shifted from thinking about the writing to thinking about the score. This thing that I think as educators, we want students to live in that wonder, to live in that exploratory, but oftentimes it is really dependent upon the feedback we give. So here we had the evidence, the student was asking for certain things, and at least in this agent's assessment of all the feedback that it's going through is that I kind of neglected Noah. And Noah actually responded in a way that's natural when being neglected. Just, okay, I'm just getting my work done now, instead of being, curious about how they can make their work better. So we'll see if, this is the prompt. It says, what are my students collectively worried about that I haven't addressed yet? So, one, will this still work next time? So the loudest worry, and it never gets the whole class answer, 8 students, will I be able to do this again? So students are really worried that, hey, they learned the skill, but will they actually be able to do this again later? Will these skills stick? How does grading actually work? So how does this rubric really work? Students are worried about that. I think that's a common worry. Does my argument actually matter outside of this class? So, real world purpose. So again, these agents, I think, are some of those powerful tools that we can use, because it's actually, you can train it on the actual data of your classroom, and it can give us really quick feedback that can let us target each student's needs in the classroom.
It's awesome,
Yeah,
Dave. I
so
love seeing this. It's would have been so helpful to have had this in the classroom. So thank you so much for that. I'll just share my screen just to finish off this last little section, and that back up there. So yeah, now if you are, we're very heavily into universal design for learning here at Learning Designer Pro. We like to make sure that whenever we're demoing things, we've got one eye on the pedagogy first side of things. We want to make sure that it is rooted in good practice, but also, some of the things that we haven't had time to discuss today, which we would love to go into in a further webinar perhaps, is how using Copilot can actually not just support your feedback mechanisms, but actually lend itself to the sort of inclusivity and reduction of barriers to learning, which comes through using universal design for learning as an inclusivity and equity framework. So, Copilot can support all of these different ways of ensuring that your feedback is personalized, useful, and actionable for all of your students. So we've really enjoyed showing you some of the great things that Copilot can do today. Do remember that we are available for booking sessions working with your school or your district. And, we've got lots of courses and PD that target not just AI, but all other aspects of teaching and learning in the classroom using various digital tools. So thank you ever so much for coming today. Thank you for listening. I hope there's been a few things to take away and think about, and perhaps use in the classroom. But we're really grateful that you've spent an hour with us today, and we hope to see you back again in our future webinars, and I hope you'll join the Learn Designer Pro community as well. So thank you ever so much, and we'll hang around just for a minute or so afterwards in case there are any questions, but we look forward to seeing you again, and thank you.